Welcome to the Unseminary Podcast. Are you looking for practical ministry help to drive your ministry further, faster? Have a sinking feeling that your ministry training didn't prepare you for the real world? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others in pursuit of stuff that we wish they had taught in seminary. Buckle up, and let's get started with this week's Unseminary Podcast.
All right, well, happy Thursday, everybody. It's Rich here from the Unseminary Podcast. I'm so glad that you've decided to spend some time with us. I know there's a lot of things you could be doing with your time today, and so it's just a privilege. I'm humbled that you'd put us in your earbuds to just learn a little bit from another church leader. Today, I'm honored to have a friend, my former boss, Bruxy Cavey, on the line from the Meeting House in Toronto, Canada, or kind of based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Bruxy, welcome to the show.
This is a privilege, Rich. It's lovely to be connecting this way. Thank you.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. I love the beard. I was commenting earlier. That's a great addition to, it's like kind of Duck Dynasty meets Amish world.
Amish, that's right. I'm going with the Amish Santa look for the season.
Nice. That's great. Yeah. Good. Well, Brooks, why don't we start with you kind of telling us a little bit of the Meeting House story. Kind of give us an overview of who is the Meeting House.
Sure. In fact, even the name, the Meeting House, speaks to our roots. We're an Anabaptist church, so we come out of that Mennonite Amish background, and Mennonite churches will still call their buildings where they meet in meeting houses. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of pulling out of our roots, but we're a contemporary version of an Anabaptist movement. Anabaptism focuses on the simplicity of Jesus, the Christocentric approach to Scripture. Just focus on Jesus, read what he said to do, and live it out. Simplicity when it comes to things like materialism, focus on community, the barn-raising mentality, family. We take those kinds of principles, and we're a repentant version of that, because Anabaptists have really, in North America anyway, become legalistic about it. And so they say, live simply, but then they create a rule around that says, we won't own cars, or we'll all have the same kind of wardrobe, we'll all look identical, then we won't compete with our worldly possessions and appearances. So we take away the legalism, we repent of the legalism, now we're just left with Jesus and his teachings, and we say, what does that look like when we live out the principle rather than the precept, rather than the letter of the law? What does the spirit of these principles look like lived out? So that's our background, and we've been a growing church that has cared a lot about evangelism, something that Anabaptists traditionally have ceased to do because we were too busy running from persecution. We hunkered down and in a farming community and said, let's hope nobody notices us. Right. And so in the history of Anabaptists, we forgot about the Great Commission, really. And so we're a repentant version of that as well, saying, what does it look like for us to really care about bringing people into a position where they can be introduced to the gospel of Jesus? And through that, we've grown, and now we've ended up becoming multi-site on top of that. And so we've got 15 different sites, and a few thousand people, I guess between 5,000 and 6,000 people show up on a Sunday spread across the sites. And it seems like every couple of years we're reinventing how we do church just to adjust to changing numbers and changing times. So it's a fun ride.
Yeah, one of the things I love about the Meeting House, about the community there, is in a lot of ways you seem like you hold a bunch of tensions, a bunch of kind of dichotomies that, a lot of times if you would think of an Anabaptist church, you'd think maybe Mennonite, but if you were to walk into your services on a Sunday morning there, in Oakville, they don't feel very Mennonite. They're high energy music, maybe movie clips or something from The Walking Dead, or it's this interesting kind of cultural milieu. Tell me about that.
It's very true. Jesus talked about new wineskins replacing the old wineskins, and one of the things that he doesn't go into detail in the analogy, but we know it's embedded in the analogy, is that a new wineskin is soft, it's supple, and it's open to change. It can expand. Old wineskins are brittle. And so we really want to be a new wineskin community, which says, what does it mean to change our style, our approach, be open to innovation, be open to technology, and at the same time, who we are doesn't have to compromise with society, with culture. We can speak the language of culture, use the technology of culture, and still be on point with what we think is an important message. So our wineskin should always be changing, we think, and be open to change, and we don't want to be legalistic about it. So we've repented of that, and so yeah, when you come and hang out with us, I love being in the ministry of busting up people's expectations, keeps them kind of unsettled, what's going on here, and I think that then prepares us to say, let's take a fresh look at Jesus together.
Well, appreciate that. I wonder if, kind of digging a little bit deeper into that, thinking about Jesus and about his approach to leadership, are there things that you see in his leadership that maybe, as people who are trying to reach folks with the message of Jesus, that we maybe sometimes forget or we sometimes leave behind?
Yes.
What are some of those things that you think, that we maybe sometimes ignore when we think about traditional leadership?
Well, I guess first of all, what's important to note is that when we're talking about Jesus, there are things that we are to emulate and things that we are to allow to remain exclusively part of his self-definition. Right? So that we don't just say whatever Jesus does, we do. Jesus receives worship from people. We shouldn't do that. Right? Jesus runs away from his parents when he's 12 and says, I'm hanging out with my real parent. We shouldn't teach our 12-year-olds to do that. So there's certain things when we look at the life of Christ, we say, he is showing us what God looks like. Our response is simply to worship, not to say, I'm going to also do the same thing. So there are certain, we have to, I think, case by case, say, what is he setting us an example here? And he'll usually teach on it. If he's setting us an example, which is really wonderful, he'll teach clearly on it, then he'll model it in his life. He will teach forgiveness and love of our enemies, then you watch his life and he will model it. So we know that's what we should be doing.
Right.
And then other times he sits in the seat of judgment. He pulls out the whip and he judges the temple, and those times he never says, come on, disciples, let's go, boys. We're going to do this together. I'm now teaching you what you should go and do. He's sitting in the seat of judgment, which is the seat of God. And so we step back and we watch and we observe and we worship. And so I think that's the first maneuver of interpretation we need to do when we look at life and the teachings of Jesus. And he makes that clear for us as long as we're open to taking note. Is he leading an example, or is he showing us God? And then when he does call us into following, into his example, there is this call to gentleness and to mercy and to ongoing forgiveness. And there's just a beautiful grace, the dying to self, not saying these are my rights, this is what I need, but the picking up of the cross and following him, the love of enemies. Those people who are really jazzed on Jesus within our culture should have a reputation on the street of being gentle, graceful, merciful, very embracing. And that's just not often our rep on the street. If you ask, what do you think about people who are really into Jesus? They should be able to say, well, I don't know if I agree with them or not, but I'll tell you this, whenever more of them move into our community, or they start one of these things called a church, or they start gathering people around, I'm so excited because they just bless us and they're so sweet and loving and compassionate. That's not our rep, but it should.
No, absolutely.
When we just switch that first principle around and we say, hey, Jesus was tough and he judged and and then we say that's what we should do. That when you just switch that around, we're actually sitting ourselves in the seat of God, and we become the judges of culture, judges of society. We think that anger becomes the emotion of holiness, which is the word orge in Greek. When it's used of God, is always used righteously, and when it's used of humans, we're always cautioned against it. It's the same word. It gets translated wrath when it's talking about God and God's wrath, and when it talks about us in old translations, it would still say wrath. That's why wrath is one of the 7 deadly sins back in Old Catholic tradition, but usually that gets translated anger. When it's the same word, you say, well, why when it's talking about God is it not a sin? And when it talks about it in human terms, there's a lot of caution at the very least surrounding it, and that's because anger is the emotion associated with judgment. That is God's seat. That is the driver's seat. That is what Jesus occupies. And so yes, he can display his wrath, but that's one of those areas where we don't come along and say, watch us condemn the world along with you, Jesus, and then we'll prove to everyone that we're holy. I think that's one of the key lessons that we as evangelical Christians in the West need to unlearn, is that anger is not the emotion that will help us display our holiness.
Oh man, there's a lot to unpack there. One of the things I appreciate about what you said is my daughter's she's 14 now, and she's like big personality, and it's interesting because at school everyone interprets that as she's a leader because she can get up and make a big ruckus and get everybody to follow her. It's hard to try to push some deeper character values here, and I love that you're calling out gentleness, particularly in leadership. Now, when you think about leading in your church, I'm sure there must be times where you frankly do want to be angry. Things upset you. So what does that look like for you as you lead? How do you lead out of gentleness with your people?
It's true. It's something that we do have to model. That I think for those of us who are in leadership, and those of us who are communicating leaders, that is, we're not only leading behind the scenes, but we're standing up and modeling something. Here's the challenge for us, is that the fruit of the Spirit are not suggestions for only certain kinds of people, certain personality types, or certain behind-the-scenes Christians. They are what the Spirit's trying to do in our lives all the time. And you could partner that with the characteristics of love, being long-suffering, etc., in 1 Corinthians 13, and you have a really fully orbed understanding of what the Spirit is trying to breathe into our lives all the time. And what is conspicuously absent from the list at any time is anger, or even just those generic terms of like, I'm passionate, I'm excited, I'm on point, I'm on fire, which we sometimes use as euphemisms for I'm a bully. And not necessarily. I mean, a lot of people listening who say, well, I want to be passionate, not fire, which is great, right? But be cautious that we're not hiding behind euphemisms for just allowing a kind of judgmental spirit or anger to arise. And here's the challenge for us. For those of us who are in point leadership and who are communicating, how can we show an excitement and a zeal for truth while at the same time we are modeling the very same fruit of the Spirit? Can I teach with a conviction that at the same time is modeling peace and patience and kindness and gentleness, one of the fruit of the Spirit? I have to challenge myself and not give myself an easy out. I have to say, I need to speak on Sunday morning in a persuasive, convicting, enlightening, and an engaging way that is also, people can say, I see the gentleness in that. And if they can't, they're missing, I'm not doing my job allowing the fruit of the Spirit to engage every area of my life, which is really challenging for us because we live in a culture where the tone of voice that gets people rallied around.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Yes. And as we push toward that, I think we're just being too easy on ourselves and buying into more of a cultural manifestation of what passion should look like. Passion also needs to look like the fruit of the Spirit. So it's just worth spending time marinating in as leaders. We are modeling something to our people. Then they go into their conversations with others and they lack gentleness, they lack peace and patience and kindness in their tone of voice and in their posture and in their approach. They're getting that from us.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things for people who are listening in who don't know Bruxy and his teaching, and he's probably going to stop me from saying this, but I really do think Brux is one of the best communicators in North America. He really is one of those people who just does, I think, an incredible job communicating clearly about the message of Jesus. And, you know, give us a bit of coaching now. You just came through a series about Islam.
Yes.
And in that series, that's a topic, that's an area of discussion where it seems like the best Christians get all angry about it. How did you approach that from a gentle, point of view?
Sure. One of the things that helps me on many of these potentially divisive topics, other religions, violence, same-sex marriage. I mean, there's all kinds of areas where we can draw our battle lines and become argumentative in a way that is unhealthy. One of the things that helps me approach this is understanding that there is a marked difference between acceptance and agreement. And I think when Christians do not understand the difference between acceptance and agreement, they will make many mistakes in how they approach a topic. Once we see acceptance and agreement as enmeshed, then I cannot even allow myself to be seen as fully accepting you, because I'm afraid that as I show a warmth and acceptance, that will be misinterpreted as agreement. And I don't want to be seen as agreeing with you, so I have to pull back on any social cues that will suggest I accept you. And so the angry tone comes out and the sense of truth and taking the stand, which we feel we need to do in order to be very clear. Well, I don't want to be unclear in any way, but of course Jesus understood that acceptance and agreement were very different, and he was so accepting of people that it did become confusing to who? It became confusing to the religious conservatives of his day. They wanted the clear lines, and so he was so accepting of people. They would say, you're a tax collector, you're a glutton, or you're a friend of these people, you're a wine bibber and a glutton, you're a friend of tax collectors. You are so accepting that you're blurring the lines. And so I think our sense of acceptance should be so extremely defined by the character of Christ that, yes, for the religious conservative, they're made to be uneasy, and yet in no way are we compromising truth. And when we're starting to make religious conservatives uneasy, we're probably starting to live like Jesus.
Are you giving us a bit of insight? You must have got some interesting feedback from that series. If people haven't listened to that series, there might be some, it might have made people uncomfortable
Sure.
because you're trying to approach the topic, I think, in a thoughtful manner, in a way that honors Jesus, but maybe not necessarily a typical approach.
Sure, yes. And then we're also pacifists, so for some people, that also adds a political dimension. Are you criticizing our government or telling us, which we're not? So so you have to listen to the series. But it's called ISIS, Islam, and Jesus. And it's true, we would get extreme reactions for some people whenever we approach a topic like this, or same-sex marriage or anything else where it's divisive, where they'll say, you weren't clear enough. And so I will walk through the message and I'll say, look at the scriptures we looked at. Look at how we called people to Jesus as Lord. Look at how and even an outline in print we handed out, completely clear where we stand. And I will say to them, how did you not hear that? What blinders did you have on?
Right.
And what it comes down to, if we have the time to have a coffee and talk it through, is I didn't hear the tone. I didn't actually hear the tone that tells me how wrong you think they are.
Yes.
And so when they hear a happy tone and a gentleness, while we're also saying here's where we stand and what we think is wrong, and for religious people who live within a tradition of anger equals holiness equals truth, it throws them off. But that they need to be thrown off. Unfortunately, non-Christians then will start to learn how to have disagreements that are amicable and friendly, but then Christians will, because Christians default to anger as holiness quicker than our non-Christian friends. That's not the way it should be.
Absolutely. Oof. All right. Well, just one kind of last line of questioning before we let you go. I know you're a busy guy. Canada is, for folks that don't know, Canada is, wildly unchurched, more so than down south and south of the border. How much do you think that the meeting house's appeal and approach within that context, which really is bucking the trend, to have 5,000 people show up at a church in a country where maybe 5% of the population attends church is radical, is unknown. How much of that do you think is connected to kind of your core teaching and message, the kind of Anabaptist approach? How much of that do you think is resonating, with folks who are maybe haven't been connected to a church in a while?
Yeah, well, I would say that even for many of the people who are turned off of religion, many of them still have a soft spot for Jesus. They are open to learning about Jesus, and if we can give them a safe place to come and ask questions so they feel they were not going to be coercive. I mean, we embed Q&A into our Sunday teaching. Even if we only have time for a couple of questions, its symbolic value is huge. This is a place where you get to come and ask questions, and we're not just going to shout at you, but we want to engage you in a conversational way. So to create that safe space to come and begin to learn about Jesus, that I think still has great appeal, even to many people who have long since given up church, or even I'm not sure if they believe in God. Right. Jesus is a historically significant figure, no matter where you land on the faith spectrum. So to give a place for people to just come and learn about him in a non-coercive way seems to really mean something to a lot of people. And basically, Canada is just America living 20 years in the future.
That's very true.
That's it.
Yep.
So I think that sometimes when I go down to the States, I feel like I time travel a little bit, strictly speaking. It's like, oh, this is probably what it was like in Canada in the 1950s or something. I'm not sure. In certain pockets. I know that in the States there's just such wide variety, city and urban and state to state for sure. But Canada is a little more uniform in its just secularization. We're kind of a blend of American and European culture. Comes to where we're at spiritually, and yet I'm happy to say, as a time traveler from the future, people will still have a soft spot to have a conversation about Jesus, if that's what we lead with front and center. That would, if we were non-believers and we were just talking about marketing from a secular point of view, that would be a good tip for us, just from a marketing point of view. You should lead with Jesus. What is fascinating, though, is as Christians, that's what we should be doing. That's what we want to do. So we really have no excuse. Just keep on point and keep Jesus in the center.
Nice. Thank you so much, Bruxy. I really appreciate your time today. If people want to get in touch with you or, in touch with the Meeting House, how can they do that?
Sure. Well, for me, it's easy. At Twitter, it's Bruxy. If you got a name like Bruxy, you might as well leverage it. So it's just Bruxy. My email is bruxy@bruxy.com. You can look up Bruxy on Facebook. And so I'm easy to find. And the Meeting House is just themeetinghouse.com. All one word, themeetinghouse.com. And our sermons are there or on iTunes, and or you can get in touch with me for more information.
Great. Thanks so much. Appreciate you being on the show today.
Rich, this is a privilege. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's Unseminary podcast. Don't be shy. We'd love to connect. Check out Unseminary Inbox. You can sign up at unseminary.com and we'll send you helpful training resources every week. Plus, you'll gain immediate access to our exclusive members area with tons of resources you can use. Connect with Rich on Twitter at Rich Birch or through email, rich@unseminary.com. Don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode at unseminary.com. It includes links to what we talked about today and more. Leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Did you enjoy today's episode? Drop by iTunes and leave a review. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's Unseminary podcast. Join us next week when we'll learn more stuff we wish they taught in seminary.